This is a session on reflecting on teaching, and so important, especially this year, given the title, this year of upheaval that we have been going through. I think it's all, we are all very aware that it has been a whole year of navigating COVID, but it has also been an academic year that has passed now. And so to pause and to reflect on teaching would have always been important. And here at the Center of Teaching and Learning, we felt reflection at this point in time was even more critical or even more important, given what we have all been going through. So that's what this session is really focused on and all about. Before I begin, I wanted to acknowledge that Queen's University is situated on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. This is a photo of my partner and my two girls, and they are sitting along the banks of the Katarekwe River. We are close to the river where we are situated. I am a settler. My family is of settler heritage. And I often use walks, as most people are throughout the pandemic, as a chance to pause and reflect. And those walks often take me to the banks of the Katarekwe, where I do think about my situatedness on the land, what's around me and the people who were here before me, but also how the land then supports me to pause and take some time away from my computer. So I encourage all of you to get some time outside today. Think of the same of how you are situated on this land that you live on and play on and work on. Today's session, as I alluded to in the introduction, will really focus on identifying elements that have maybe worked well for you over the past year of teaching, and some questions that help you to flag or identify those potential opportunities for adjustment, growth, or change to teaching. Robin, did you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and maybe speak to some of the elements around those who are in other educational support roles?
For sure. Yeah. So my name is Robin Addis. I'm also an educational developer in the Center for Teaching and Learning. And I'm speaking to you today from another part of Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territories on the west side of the city currently known as Kingston. And I look out my window at Lake Ontario. So I appreciate Lauren's acknowledgement of water as part of the land and our relationship to that land. I think one thing that Lauren and I had noted in terms of the participants in this session is that there's both folks who have maybe been teaching over this year, folks who are maybe hoping to teach and thinking about what does critical reflection or reflection on teaching look like. And then also a number of educational support folks who are in the virtual room. So we thought we might add another learning outcome specifically for those who are in more of a teaching support role around taking the ideas in this workshop and the practices that we suggest and using them in your own ed development or ed support practice as a way of supporting instructors to do that critical reflection. But I think at the same time, a lot of the reflective strategies that Lauren's pulled together, you'll find can be reflective in a number of ways. So maybe you want to use it to think about your own practice over the year and what that's looked like in your support role and to reflect on that. So lots of options in terms of ways to navigate this workshop.
Yeah, absolutely. And the agenda kind of speaks to that. So first, we will very briefly look over some of the perspectives from the literature that inform acts of teaching reflection, and then go through 2 rounds of activities or focused facilitated reflection. And finally, we will wrap up by discussing some next steps or how you might take this into the future beyond today. So as Robin was speaking to, there are just so many different perspectives that we might bring to reflection on teaching, so many maybe data points or sources of information that qualify or count as reflective components to teaching and learning. So this is largely drawn from the literature. For example, Schoen and Taylor were both foundational in the literature related to teaching and reflection, where they were describing the various viewpoints on reflection. So for example, self-reflection is really what we are doing today. It's the reflection that you are engaging in as an instructor, or from your own perspective on yourself. But compare that to peer input. So for example, casual conversations that you have with your colleagues about teaching, that is a source of reflection and thinking about teaching. So too would be more formalized forms of peer input, like observation. If you ever, through this term, had peers join you in, colleagues join you in teaching. Student feedback is another critical thing, and I think we do this really inherently, is to think about the students and what they have told us about teaching, whether that be formal through exit surveys, through the CUSATs, or through informal means. So reflecting on your students' performance over the term. Where did they struggle that was maybe unanticipated, or where did they exceed your expectations? And then finally, there can be a component of scholarly reflection as well. Those who look to the scholarship of teaching and learning, to the evidence or to the literature for sources of ideas or information, that's a moment where you are thinking and comparing to your own teaching practice. And all of this sort of centers around and is grounded in your core values or teaching philosophy as well. So that could be a component that you're thinking of. Schoen distinguished between reflection in action and reflection on action. So reflection in action is that formative sense of, as you're teaching in the moment, you are pausing or thinking or taking notes about your teaching. Reflection on action is more after the fact, when you pause, say at the end of the term like this, and you are thinking about your teaching or thinking back on what happened. And so today's session is really kind of one perspective, one element of teaching reflection that is more or less reflection on action, and that self reflection perspective. And finally, I won't speak too much to this. There's a lot here, but appropriately so. The point of this slide is really that you could be focused on many different elements of teaching when you are reflecting on teaching. So you might be thinking about your delivery in the moment, like your approach, your presence in the classroom space, maybe on Zoom or Teams this year, how you presented in that space. So maybe your vocal pace, maybe the way that you used your hands. That's like delivery. But then there's also reflection on the course structure, on the curriculum, on the syllabus, and how that was enacted. Or maybe there's reflecting on your relationships with students. These are three perspectives. It doesn't capture everything, but we wanted to point out that you may be drawn to thinking about certain elements of your teaching over others, and other people, other participants in this session may be thinking about other components of their own teaching. So Sean, yeah, using your hands while recording, lectures. So through today's session, we encourage you to make this time your own. So picking up on those past two slides, how you want to focus some of your thinking and reflection. To document notes for future you. So maybe you want to open up one of your course syllabi, a Word document that you can record. I'm going to share a document that is a worksheet that basically has our questions on it that you can type into as one option. To continue with reflections beyond this session, because this is 50 minutes, it's an introduction, but we recognize that you may have other thoughts maybe as you go out for that walk later on today. And finally, check in with yourself and your current energy level. This has been that year of upheaval. There's a lot of different feelings all mixed in together in one person, as if I can speak to my own personal feelings. It's okay to pause and you know as we go into reflection. Robin, I'm going to switch over to the pugs. Would you mind facilitating that, and I'll drop in that worksheet?
For sure. Yeah, so I think that last point about checking in with yourself and your energy level is particularly important this year. I think often, as somebody who both teaches and teaches on teaching, I find that often at the end of the academic year or semester, I'm tired, I'm fed up, I don't want to do any reflection. And then this year, I'm also managing my kids at home and not seeing any finish line in the pandemic and hearing about vaccines that are available to me, except that there are no appointments available to me. And, so all of those things going on make it even more important than normal to think about and reflect on, are you really ready for this? What is it that you're ready to do today or next week or next month? And as part of doing that self-check-in, we thought that we would take a cue from our own playbook on checking in with learners or checking in with workshop participants, and ask you to share in the chat which of the following or of the presented pugs best suits your current mood. I confess that I'm a cat person. Lauren, I didn't tell you this beforehand, so I'm not sure I'm going to pick one, frankly, but if you feel drawn to a particular pug that matches your mood, please feel free to share that number in the chat today.
I was telling Robin, 3 has become my pandemic mascot. So I'm consistently drawn to the 3. Sean says he's also a 3, but ready to be a 4 again. Yeah, to jump in and to get swimming. And I love the photo of number 1, that poor little girl just wanting that pug to come along with her, but that pug is not really having it.
We are not doing any more of this. I feel like that's the number 1.
Thanks for sharing what resonates with you in the chat. I see the numbers sort of all over, and as we expected, as I think I could answer 1 through 4 for myself, depending on the minute. If my microphone's picking up what's happening upstairs, there's definitely some 1 going on up there with children crying. Great. So thanks for that. I hope that's giving you a chance to check in with yourself, and it certainly has given us a chance to sort of read the room and know where everyone's feeling like they're at. We would like to head into the first reflection activity, and so I will now advance the slides to pose to you 3 questions that we wanted to focus reflection 1 upon. Feel free to respond to the questions that resonate with you most. We are going to give you time to be thinking through these questions. So I just wanted to take a moment to introduce the questions to you and how we will structure about 20 minutes of reflection time around this first activity, this first round. So the 3 questions are these. What has worked well for you in this last year? What have been some of your greatest challenges or obstacles? And then if you have been in a position where you have received some feedback from students or those that you work with on your activities, your teaching activities over the past year, what feedback have you received from those individuals that you would like to really remember and remind yourself of into the future?
And maybe, Lauren, if I can just jump in here, I'm thinking ahead to our second activity, which is more focused on what have we learned from remote teaching or from the pandemic. So for this reflection, we're really asking you to be more in the weeds around, what were you doing day to day, week to week in a specific course, and to maybe, the greatest challenge obstacle could be remote teaching, and that we will address in our second reflection activity. So try to think more about it was such a challenge to get students to engage in the weekly Zoom session, or it was such a challenge to figure out what content to keep or what to get rid of week to week. Try to make it more specific, I would say, for the reflection.
Absolutely. And we have 2 ways that we wanted to offer your engagement in this reflection. We're going to take 10 minutes on the clock to have 10 minutes of dedicated reflection time. And Robin and I were thinking about how there's some people who really just at this early stage want to chat that out, talk about it with other people. Others, though, want to sit quietly with their thoughts, with themselves, and engage more in that independent thought. And so I would ask you to please raise your hand or signal in the chat if you would prefer the independent approach. And those who we are not getting a signal from, we will put you into some pairs, and either way, we're going to have some breakout space. So a raised hand is for independent, opting not to be paired at this time. Thanks. Continue to let me know as you are going, and I'm going to set up some breakout rooms for us here. It is 11:18. So that means that at 11:28, we will reconvene. So that gives you 10 minutes to take some quiet time to be thinking through these questions and recording some thoughts. So in this last minute, just finish up some of your writing and we will come back together to share. And there's certainly no obligation to share, but if there was maybe one or two thoughts that stood out to you from everything you thought or recorded in taking some notes, we would love to hear about it in the chat, or if you feel comfortable to unmute and share verbally. Sean, yeah, go ahead.
I think one of the things that I was surprised to me worked well was actually the recording of lectures and doing recorded stuff. I think it worked well for me in that I could, and I didn't do a lot of it, but if I did mess something up, I could jump back a little bit and fix it as I was going through and then edit it out afterwards. Although I left most of that stuff in because I forgot that I had meant to go back and edit it out, or because I figured, well, that's what happens in the classroom. But I also got feedback from the students. For most of the students, I think that they were reasonably comfortable with the recorded side of things. And I think that comes down to just the whole timing aspect of their lives and such, where they could set another course aside and focus on individual ones because they didn't have to be on top of everything every week, whereas things ebbed and flowed in assessments and coursework and that sort of things, they could sort of consume a bunch and then put it aside and do something else for a while, as opposed to being, all right, you shall be here at this time every day and we shall talk at you, etc. I think in general that actually worked for most of my courses. I think it worked well.
It's interesting to hear that, because I think, Sean, do you mostly teach upper year courses?
I do. It's third and fourth year stuff.
Yeah, because it was interesting to hear from student support folks on campus that especially the first years were really struggling with that kind of time management, whereas maybe your students were more at this place of readiness for like, yeah, I will pick up this and put this down and shift to here and there. But you know, good feedback and reflection regardless. Anyone else feel like sharing a little bit of what they wrote about?
Hi. One thing that I was reflecting on was that I think office hours may have worked better in this situation. Maybe because students feel more comfortable doing office hours. It's just, you don't have to walk to campus and stuff like that. So there were more students coming to office hours, so there was more chance for discussion that and creating that relationship that which you can only create on a one-on-one situation. So I think that was something that was that I enjoyed and was good about this.
Did anyone else notice that some of their students were maybe more likely to reach out to them or reached out through email more than in a typical year?
I know in my course we had office hours only on occasion. It wasn't a weekly offering, and I did have the feedback from students that they wished there had been more time for office hours, but in general, casual conversation that would have enabled and allowed. So I took that as something that I could think through for next year. Lindsay's saying she had fairly good attendance for office hours as well. So there seems to be something of a consistent when you start to compare some of the experiences. I hope those 3 questions have given you at least the start of things to think about. I did find it helpful myself. I was taking notes, and when Robin prompted the return to those 3 columns, because I sort of went down that list and said, okay, well, yeah, like what is my reflection on my intonation, because I wouldn't have really paused to think about that otherwise. And so I hope that sort of signals some direction forward, that you could take these questions, continue to think on them, and maybe use that slide. I will send these slides out to participants, and they will be a part of the recording for those who are watching back at a later time, to do some of that comparison. Thanks for those who shared. Robin, are you feeling ready to move on to reflection activity 2?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Great.
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, the second reflection that we're doing is kind of taking a bigger picture, or what I think of as a bird's eye view. And I think, of course, given my name, but also given my proclivity for speaking in metaphor, I really like to think about the bird's eye view and to think about the different views that different birds provoke. So I've put here on the slide an American robin and a red-tailed hawk and a bald eagle. One other thing, the bonus of the pandemic for me has been getting better at my bird identification. So that's part of where this slide is also headed. So, but if you think about these 3 birds for a moment, so the robin, you probably, I hope, have started to see them hopping around on the ground quite a bit, because they like to eat things like bugs and worms. And so they mostly stay at that low, in the weeds, literally, level of thinking about, what's right down here on the ground. And then they'll sometimes fly up, say, to make a nest in a tree or sit on a fence. The red-tailed hawk, you might see down low, swooping across the ground, especially if it's looking to pick up some lunch. But you might also see it soaring a bit higher, sitting in a tree, for instance. I remember back when we were allowed to travel interprovincially, I was driving back from a place in Quebec and noticed, every 5 kilometers, it seemed, there was another red-tailed hawk sitting in a tree next to the highway. So they take that kind of mid-level view and are able to see a bit more about what's ahead, where they came from, what the landscape is around them. The eagle, on the other hand, is known for being one of the highest soaring creatures on Earth, or amongst the Earth, within the air, and can take that really tall, let's see what's around, and has amazing eyesight, and is able to see that huge perspective of where have I come from, where am I going, what's way over there, what's way back there, where do I want to go right now? I see that little fish in the pond, I want to go right down there and then back up again. So so thinking about those different perspectives, and now translating that to the pandemic and teaching specifically, but also more generally, I think for me at least, the last year has really shown me anyways how this pandemic has created a complete upheaval in our society, and that has provoked often some pushes towards really radical changes. So for instance, I've been reading about how in particular the federal government in Canada has taken on a big government model that was mostly abandoned during the Thatcher and Reagan and even Stephen Harper era. So this sense of like government as looking out for someone. So that's a big shift. The climate change crisis has not gone anywhere, and yet is still kind of this big thing that people are now starting to say, hey, if we could shut down the whole economy because of a pandemic virus, maybe we could do something similar for climate change, which is equally dangerous to our health. And then, thinking about the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, anti-racism movements, both within the United States, Canada, and globally, the kind of push for radical change that's come out of this past year and a bit is really is in some cases, the upheaval and the uncertainty and the instability of that, but also the potential for change and for transformation, I think, is there. And so there's this potential now to take that sense of upheaval and translate it into your own teaching and learning sphere. Certainly we've had the upheaval of remote teaching, and that's been, a huge disruption for all of us. But there's also that opportunity to fly up high, to take that bird's eye view and to say, hey, what do we like? What do we keep about this as we move forward? And that's hard. I will admit, we might not all have the wingspan of an eagle to fly up there and say, that thing I was doing before the pandemic was actually not working for the learners in my course. And now that I was forced into this remote teaching vortex, I've somehow managed to change things in a way that I kind of want to keep as we pull out of this, because we will pull out of it. I'm saying that doubting every word of it at this moment, but I know that it's true. So thinking future oriented and saying, what is worth hanging on to from this experience? And so I think that, I want to just sort of say straight up that there is that uncertainty about September. Queen's has certainly made some statements about its aspirations for the fall, but there's no one, I think, on this planet right now who can say September 1st, we will be doing this absolutely definitively. And so that kind of hampers a little bit this sense of like, what do I want to do? And this is my plan. But at the same time, maybe there are things that you can pull from this past year and you're able to say, this is what I want to keep. So that's really the purpose of this particular exercise. So if you flip to the next slide, Lauren. Here we've got kind of 3 prompting questions. One is to think about, what did you do differently this year that you might not have tried in normal circumstances? So maybe you used OnCue or your own faculty's LMS in a different way than you might have normally done. Maybe you had different teaching methods, I imagine, in some ways. And we talked a little bit about recorded lectures before. So thinking about something you did differently that you might not have otherwise tried. How did it go? And then maybe what would you continue or what would you change? And we're going to take a little bit less time for this reflection, maybe just a couple of minutes for you to do some free writing on your own, or thinking or drawing, whatever kind of gets those creative juices flowing. And then we'll discuss as a group. All right, so just wrapping up your thoughts, and maybe what actually would be nice is if everyone feels comfortable to put into the chat like 1 or 2 words that describe what you did differently this year. So maybe it was RISE modules or online office hours, or whatever it was that you identified. If you could put that in the chat, then we can kind of get a picture of what everyone was thinking about. So I'm seeing Sean using exit surveys for each topic or week. Lauren mentioning that she prioritized student well-being. Lauren Tran mentioning the flipped classroom. Leah, one-on-one weekly support for instructors. So it sounds like in some ways there's a theme emerging about doing certain things more than usual, whether that was student well-being or support for instructors, like just ramping that up even more than might have been typical.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think how ramping certain elements up actually means prioritizing those things over others. And so it could mean, for example, with a flipped classroom, you're making very judicial decisions about what happens when, and maybe what doesn't happen at all in terms of maybe content coverage or certain activities or assignments. Because I know that was my thought in prioritizing student well-being, that to cut down on some of the course load. And that actually worked very well, I thought. So in ramping up, we're also ramping other things down sometimes.
For sure. And I think, I mean, that kind of leads nicely to the question about continuing and changing is, is that prioritizing, was it valuable in terms of student learning? Did it lead to greater student learning? And is it maybe a value that's worth keeping going forwards? I think that the pandemic made everyone realize that well-being and health matter a lot, but then, but that they might matter all the time. And if that the priority all the time, how would that change our teaching, is an interesting question to ponder.
Great. And Lindsay, go ahead, Robin.
No, we're supposed to go ahead, Lauren. I call on you.
I just was reading Lindsay's comment there about some attempt to recreate sharing circles, which she would normally do very much face-to-face, and finding the alternative or the structure that would work in a remote environment. And I was thinking too about the timeliness of this offering of this workshop, that we wanted to schedule this at a time that was right at the very cusp of the end of the winter term and the beginning of the spring term, and it's at that cusp where maybe you haven't had a chance yet to check in on the student feedback you're receiving, or to take a look at student performance over the course. But that's where pausing to think of your own reflection first can inform the perspectives or the questions that you ask of other forms of data, like student performance, or as you're reviewing the exit surveys you're receiving from students at the end of the course. Because as those are coming in, as we make that transition, it is helpful to look to other sources, to go back to that initial diagram I presented, other sources of information that inform some of your thinking about teaching. And so we wanted to leave you with thinking through some next steps. And the questions that we had for you were really, if you could look at everything you kind of thought through or wrote down, is there a task that stands out to you as one of the very next steps you could take in thinking through that transition? What has the winter term been for you, and what is the summer shaping up to look like? Hopefully some rest. But also hopefully some reframing in preparation for what's ahead. And so if there is something that stands out to you as the very next step, or something you could work on next, our next question to you is, when would you do that? Is there a time that you could peg for yourself as the opportunity to take action? Maybe it likely is not today. And so we were thinking, even to go into your calendar and to put some time into a week, a couple weeks from now, with a little note to say, this is when I'm going to take action on that next step. So when is it that next step might need to happen, and to flag that for yourself? And then can we help? Can we be a part of that in some way? Because we do offer some summer programming, and Raman and I wanted to very briefly leave you with some of that information in case one of your next steps actually connects to something that we might be facilitating or supporting. So first off, Robin, did you want to briefly speak to the spring and the Writing Pedagogy Institute that's coming up quite soon?
Yeah, so if you used writing in your course, or if you supported instructors who used writing in their course, feel free to think more about, and you want to think more about that. The Writing Pedagogy Institute is a great way to do that. The way it's being run this year is that I've got 4 webinars on 4 different content areas. And you can by all means just sign up for one of those 4, and that's what you do depending on what topic you're interested in. There's also an associated OnQ site with some extra videos on other topics, and also an activity around peer review of your own assignment and rubric, but that also gives you a flavor of what the platform feedback fruits looks like from a student perspective if you're considering using it as an instructor. So more details on the website, but if you're interested or flagged writing at all or student writing as an area of further study, then that might be a good strategy for you.
And then similarly focused on course design, generally 2 events that are coming up first. So about a month from now, there's a one-off workshop very similar to this titled Future Proofing Your Course Design. So rather than looking into the crystal ball and trying to anticipate what's happening, some course design approaches that will hopefully help to avoid that kind of plan A through Z, and more the planning that will be flexible and adaptable. Furthermore, we do offer Course Design Express throughout the summer. So we're sort of shifting some of that design so that it will be self-directed modules that work people through a process of course design to get your course hopefully ready. And for the fall is usually the intention, possibly for the winter term. And we will be offering a boot camp, some more of like the intensive week of focus on some of those activities, June 14th through 18th. So Sandra has kindly been posting some of the links to those events as we've been talking about them. And we do also have, yes, I was going to say many other events that are upcoming. We chose to highlight or profile these 2 because maybe because we are the facilitators, but also because they have that very close connection to course design. But other fantastic events, Showcase on Teaching and Learning is happening next Wednesday, so a week from now exactly. Really great presentations from faculty members and their teaching. And Sandra, if you also wouldn't mind just posting the link generally to our event page and calendar, because we have highlighted some of the major and most upcoming, forthcoming events, but there are many others that we are facilitating over the summer that you will find in that events calendar. Finally, in giving a nod to the fact that we hope your reflection is not ending as of this moment when you log off, but rather something that you will continue with, we are available for one-on-one consultation, conversation, coffee chats, etc., and our contact information is there on the slide. It is 11:50. I will formally wrap up by asking you to please take a couple of minutes to fill out the feedback session, the feedback form that Sandra has posted. Sandra, we can stop recording, and I know I will hang around. Robin, if you have a chance to hang around, we'll start